All right, gang. So, like I said, this is going to be the last lesson of the year, section 9.6, called the quadratic formula and the discriminant. Our learning targets are basically, the big one is the top one there. We want to be able to solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. And then we can also use this thing called the discriminant to identify how many solutions an equation has. So that's the deal. And you know, obviously a big idea, if our section is called quadratic formula, it's going to be the quadratic formula itself. So you'll find that right here. It's called x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So that's kind of obviously a mouthful. I will give that to you on the test. You don't have to memorize that. That said, it's not going to help you if you don't know how to use it, right? So that's going to be the key. You'll have it, but you'll have to know how to use it, okay? So that's what we're going to practice in example 1. So let's do it. And just understand this before we just start doing this. We're not doing anything different than what we just did in our warm-up, right? We solve quadratic equations just by factoring on our warm-up. We also know how to solve quadratic equations by using Desmos, right? Looking for the x-intercept. And so there are several ways to do the same thing. This is the last way we're going to learn, okay? All right, so let's do 1a together, and I just follow along for now, okay? So you need to be able to identify A, B, and C, okay? And I would write this down. So let's just say we must be in standard form first. So if you don't remember what I mean by standard form, that means basically your equation is set equal to 0, and then on the other side we have the x squared term, and then the x term, and then the constant term. Okay, that's what standard form is. So looking at 1a, I want to move the 2x from the right to the left side. Okay, so that's going to give me x squared, and then I'm going to have you guys fill in the blank. So what happens when I move the 2x over? What would it be on the other side? Yes?
It would be x squared minus 2x.
Minus 2x. That's what I was looking for. That's right. So don't forget to flip that sign. Okay, and that's why you need to move it, because if we just try to pick out what's A, B, and C, then we'll have the opposite sign. Okay? Now that we have it written in standard form, let's go ahead and actually write out what is A, what is B, what is C. So A is our lead coefficient. So we'll say A equals 1, right? That's 1x squared. B is our coefficient of the middle term, so negative 2 in this case. And then C is our constant, so negative 8. A is 1, B is negative 2, C is negative 8. And now that we know A, B, and C, now we're going to go ahead and sub in and try to make some sense of that beastly looking thing, okay? So now that we know that, we're going to go ahead and say x equals, and it's negative b, whatever b is. So b is negative 2, so I'm going to go ahead and sub there. Plus or minus, long square root symbol, long radical sign. And then we have b squared. So b again is negative 2. Minus 4 times A, so A is 1, times C, which is negative 8. Now all of that is over, and I'll give you a second to catch up, so just keep copying from where you are. All that's over 2 times A, so 2 times 1. All right, so take a second and double check what you have. Little details too, like notice my first term, it says negative, negative 2, right? So make sure you have every little detail looking good there, and then I'll tell you what we do next, okay? All right, so what I do next as far as trying to simplify this is I try to simplify, you know, it in parts. That's going to be your biggest part, right? And then you know, this part is pretty easy. And then the easiest part is obviously 2 times 1, right? So what's in yellow is where you really need your calculator, okay? So let's see what that's going to look like actually punched in, okay? So go ahead and pull up your square root. So that's second and then x squared. That'll bring up your radical sign. Then if you have a negative b, you actually need to put that in parentheses. So I'm going to do parentheses and then -2. And then squared, so I have an x squared button. You might have to hit caret key too. I think you have an x squared button. And then -4 times a, which we don't really need to hit times 1, but I will, times -8. Notice on that one, I didn't worry about putting that negative in parentheses. It only matters when you take it to an exponent, okay? So now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and hit equals. And that gives me 6, right? So that tells me that basically, you know, b squared minus 4ac is 36, and then I take the square root. The calculator does that for me, and I get 6. Okay? Yes?
I got a dummy there.
Okay, you probably, I'm guessing you use the negative sign where you should have used the minus sign. Okay? So let's just check this out one more time, okay? So I'll do this one more time. So second square root, and maybe you just watch this time, okay? So -2 in parentheses. So I do parentheses, and then the negative is the thing down here on the bottom right, not the minus sign, okay? -2, close parentheses, squared, and then minus, not negative, minus 4 times 1, which I'm just going to skip, times -8. So it looks like that. I hit equals, and you should practice until you get 6, because you got to know how to type it in, right? Or your calculator won't be helpful, okay? A carpenter is only as useful, or a carpenter's tools are only as useful as, I'm butchering that saying, but there is a saying that's something like that, something to do with carpenter. Basically, you got to know how to use your tools, okay? We'll have to look at it later. You'll have to like I'll be walking around here in a second, but I keep trying. Okay, it's 6. All right. So our next step is going to look like this, and you got to be careful with your room here. So from here, I have -2 would be +2, so that's going to be +2 plus or minus 6 over whatever 2 times 1 is, so 2. Okay. 2 plus or minus 6 over 2. All right. So then we just simplify it both ways. It's +6 and then -6. Okay. So 2 plus 6 equals what? 8. Right. So one of our solutions is 8 over 2, which is 4. Okay. And then your other one is 2 minus 6. What would 2 minus 6 be?
4.
No.
Oh, wait, 2 minus 6.
2 minus 6. Be -4. It'd be -4. So -4 over 2 equals -2. And those are my two solutions, +4 and -2, right? So when you punch it into Math Excel, it's going to say something like, you know, it might give you the x equals, and then you type them into the box. So usually they ask you to separate it by parentheses, so something like 4 comma -2, right? So, you know, if I type this parabola into Desmos, I would see x-intercepts at 4, 0 and -2, 0. I could also solve this one by factoring. I know that because I get those integer solutions, but this is just another way, okay? So let's practice another one. Let's go ahead and do D, right? And again, keep trying. I know a couple of you said you got an error. You'll figure it out. That's why you keep trying, okay? All right, so let's skip B and C. I'm going to leave those for you guys. I want to look at D because, well, the language is a little bit different, okay? It says find the roots of, okay? That doesn't mean anything different, all right? So roots, solutions, zeros, all those things mean the same thing, okay? So roots is just, let we could say AKA solutions. Point being, know that that means the same thing, okay? So if I'm doing D, I need to write it in standard form, right? So that's step 1. So that'd give me 3p squared plus 4p. And then what's my last term when I'm, yes? Negative 10, very good. Way to be ready to answer. That's how I know you guys are looking alive, when you're just ready to answer my question before I even ask it, okay? That's good. So now that we have it in standard form, we're ready to go. What's A, what's B, what's C? All right, so let's go ahead and write it out. A is 3, B is 4, C is negative 10. And that's why it's a big deal to move it over, right? If we just look at it as it was, you might say C is 10. That's wrong, okay? C is negative 10. So you just got to be careful. All right, now we plug in. Okay, so if you want to try to do it on your own, you can, or you can just follow along. It'll take a while to get used to. So this time, it's usually x equals. This time our variable's p, so I'm going to say p equals. And then it's negative b, where b is 4. So negative 4 plus or minus, and then we have that long radical. And then it's b squared. So 4 squared minus 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is negative 10. All of that's over 2 times a. So 2 times 3. Any questions on that step? I know it's a lot, but anything confusing you so far? All right, so now we try to simplify. I know that, you know, the first part's going to be negative 4. The bottom's going to be 6. The hard part is always, you know, simplifying this part, right? So practice on your own calculator. I will tell you, you don't get a pretty number here, so don't be discouraged if you don't, okay? So I'll type it in as well. So I do second and then x squared to pull up my radical. This one's a little bit easier because you have a positive root or a positive base. So 4 squared minus 4. Make sure you hit minus and not negative. So minus 4 times 3 times negative 10. So when I do negative, that's a different button than the minus sign, right? So negative 10, not minus 10. Okay, so that's a potential to mess up, is the negative key versus the minus sign. Okay, so we get 11.66, and that keeps going, right? So what happens when you take the square root of a not perfect square is you get an irrational number, and so that decimal actually goes on and on forever. So in this case, we're gonna try not to round until the very last step. All right, so I'm actually gonna retype that in without the radical. So I'm gonna see what is 4 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 10. So it's 136, okay? So I'm gonna actually write that out on my next step. So I'm not rounding until the very end, okay? So next step is gonna look like this. We're gonna say negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 136 over 6. And the reason we left it as a radical is because 136 is not a perfect square, okay? And that's going to help us to round at the very end, right? So what we will type in to get our two solutions here will be negative 4 plus whatever the square root of 136 is, and then divided by 6. And also negative 4 minus the square root of 136 divided by 6. And again, you're starting to see this takes some skill, right? This takes some calculator skill. All right, so I'm going to type it in. You maybe type along with me. Here's what I would do. Looking at the top one, you go -4, and then plus square root of 136. And then I'd go ahead and hit enter at that point, so you're not doing too much. So hit enter, and then we can hit divided by, because that's in my calculator. So just hit divided by 6, and then we're not rounding until the very end that way. Okay. So on Math Excel, they have you round to the nearest hundredth, so that's what we'll do here. So it's between 1.27 and 1.28, a little bit closer to 1.28. All right, so that'll be one solution, is about 1.28. And then our other one is where we do minus the square root of 136. So 4 minus, sorry, that should be -4. -4 minus square root 136. I'm going to hit equals at that point, or enter. Get -15 and change, and then we just hit divided by 6 while it's still in my calculator. And we get a number that's between -2.61 and 2.60. So we would say it's about -2.61. And so those are my two solutions. All right, so these you could not, this one you could not do by factoring. Like there's no way to factor 3p squared plus 4p minus 10. So this is where it's nice to have the quadratic formula, because you can get a really exact answer. Because there's no way to factor it. You know, since we use Desmos, we can actually get a good approximation using Desmos, looking at the x intercepts. But quadratic formula is just a good way that works on everything. Okay. All right. So at this point, I'm going to have you guys, I'm going to give you about 4 minutes to kind of get ahead of me. I'll walk around and talk about calculator stuff too at that point. But if you're rolling, try to get done what you can on B and C, and then we'll talk about them, of course. And, you know, that's probably not enough time to do all of both of them for most people, but do what you can. Okay? Did you get your calculator thing sorted out? Or? Okay. Anybody else having calculator issues? I'll get you next. What's up? All right, that's good. Radical, right? So you're doing too much. You just need to type what's under the radical. Do radical. -4 times -6. So yeah, that's the same thing as the square root of 136. But if it would have been like, it would give you 6. All right. Yeah. That should be cool. But you got so okay. So you got to actually open time Yeah, so I'm going to go to him first. What's up? So what are you trying to type in? I'd have to see you type it. I took somebody's pencil. You'd have to show me what you're typing in. Like if you don't have anything written down. Try to type that one. Why don't you write out like what's A, what's B, what's C, and try that, or at least try to just write this part out and try to do that. I gotta see what you're doing to know what you're doing wrong. Try to type it. Second, and because that's a negative, you got to put it in parentheses. So you need to do parentheses -2 squared and -4 times 1 times -8. There you go. All right, so I know more of you all had questions and we'll have time tomorrow, but for right now, we're going to go through with the answers. So the answer for B, or the answers for B are -3 and +7. So if you got that, nice job. For C, -2, +5. Now I'll show how to get there, okay? So for B, got to write it in standard form first. That would give you 1x squared minus 4x minus 21 equals 0. And then at that point, we know A, B, and C. So then it's a matter of plugging in correctly. So it's -B, so -4, plus or minus the square root of B squared, so -4 squared, minus 4 times A is 1 times C is -21. All of that is over 2 times A, so 2 times 1. And guys, if you get too far behind me, remember the filled out notes will be posted, right? So it may be, if you messed up, it may be better just to watch it worked out. Or again, depending on what you need to work on, now that you know it looks like this, maybe trying to punch that part in, right? Because that's where you're going to need the practice. And once you get it, you'll know how to do it, okay? Anyways, what you get under the radical is 100, but you get 10 when you type it all in. So that's going to give me x equals +4 plus or minus 10 over 2. Okay, that's where you got to be able to get. Okay, once you're there, then you just do 4 plus 10 is 14, and 14 over 2 is 7. And you do 4 minus 10 is -6, divided by 2 is -3. So that's it. Those are your two solutions. Okay, and remember on Math Excel, you would type them in as kind of like -3, comma, +7. All right, and then C. Already in standard form, so we're ready to just identify A as 1, B is -3, C is -10. So subbed in, that's going to look like this. So -B, so it's going to be -3 plus or minus square root of B squared, so -3 squared minus 4 times 1 times -10 over 2 times 1. Now, here's one tip. If you're still struggling to get, like, to type all of what's under the radical n, one tip to make it easy, if you can remember this, is -3 squared is the same thing as +3 squared, so you may just want to type that in instead of using parentheses and stuff. It's just 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times -10, if you can remember it, okay? But if not, those parentheses will work for you just fine. All right, so when you type in the square root of -3 squared minus 4 times 1 times -10, you get 7. Okay, if you type it in correctly, you get 7. So next step has us at x equals 3 plus or minus 7 over 2. Then we do it both ways. So 3 plus 7 is 10. 10 over 2 is 5. 3 minus 7 is -4. Divided by 2 is -2. So 5 and -2. All right, and just like in the last lesson, once you have your two solutions, you can always plug them back in to see if they work, but probably easier for us would be type the quadratic into Desmos and look for the x-intercepts. That'd probably be the quickest and easiest way to check those solutions. All right, I know we're going pretty quick, but we will have time to get more into detail about like using your calculator and stuff tomorrow, okay? But we're going to keep going for now. And so now that we know like different methods of solving quadratics, we're going to go through and look at some examples and what would be the most efficient method to solve each quadratic. Okay. So looking at A, it starts with 1x squared. So my first thought would be factoring. So then I would think, can I factor that? Is there a combo that multiplies to 12 and adds to -8? And there is. So I would say, in my opinion, the easiest way to solve this one would be factoring. Okay, we're just naming the easiest way. Okay. If you get nothing out of this example other than B, it's pay attention to B. If there's one that's like B, with no middle term, the easiest way to do this one is by using square roots. Okay, that's by far the easiest way to solve this one. Okay, so you could do this one by square roots. That's a method we learned back in 9-3. And I say that because there's no bx term. And then the last one, starts with 5x squared. So if you have another option besides factoring, I would recommend it, right? So we could say probably quadratic formula would be best on C. Also, if you thought about factoring it, there's no combination that is going to multiply to -5 and add to 13. You can't do that. So it can't be factored. Okay. What's what? Quadratic formula, what we're learning today. Because I messed up. I bet it was, Robert. I bet it was. All right, so the last thing we're going to look at is this thing called the discriminant. So this is a really easy idea, and all this tells you is how many solutions you have, right? So remember, graphically, we've talked about this. X-intercepts are solutions, right? So lots of these will have 2 solutions, like that has 2 x-intercepts. So this would be a 2 solution. You could have a 1 solution where you have 1 x-intercept, and then you could have no solution where it never hits the x-axis, okay? So we can tell that by using a specific part of the quadratic formula, okay? So the discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. So does anybody recognize what part of the quadratic formula that is? That's the part that's under the what? Under the radical, right? So that's what's under the radical. And here's what you do. Once you know what that is, if it is greater than 0, that means you have 2 solutions, okay? If it's equal to 0, that means you have one solution. If it's less than 0, then you have no solutions. Okay? So let's wrap up by doing a couple of those. We'll probably skip C because we're a little low on time, but we'll do A and B together. And again, this is a good opportunity to check with your calculator. Okay? Looking at A, before we do that, we need to write it in standard form. So 2x squared minus 3x plus 5 equals 0. Once we have it there, then we're just plugging into b squared minus 4ac. All right, so b is what? Anybody tell me what b is? Almost. -3. So -3 squared minus 4. And then a is 2. And then c is what? 5. All right, now that you have that, go ahead and try to type that in real quick. -3 squared, or you could just do 3 squared, minus 4 times 2 times 5. Basically, 3 squared minus 4 times 2 times 5. And again, I'd like to call on you, but we're low on time here. If you type it in right, you get -31. Should be -31. And then, okay, so then we're looking at, it's negative, so it's less than 0. All right, so -31 is less than 0. So that tells you you have how many solutions? Anybody remember from the table? Or can anybody find it in the table? Robert?
0.
Yeah, 0 solutions.
I'm doing it on the calculator.
We'll have to look at it tomorrow. Now, the reason that's true is, what have you always been told? You can't take the square root of a what? You can actually take the square root of 0, but you're on the right track. A negative, right? You can't take the square root of a negative. So if that's negative, right, it's going to give you an error. That's when you should get an error. Okay? And then let's do one last one, and that'll send us home. Whoops. So moving the +7 over to make it -7. Then we sub in. So B is -5. A is 6. And C is -7. So I'll give you about 10 seconds or so to get caught up with me, and then I'll give you the answer. So if you're already caught up, maybe try to type it in, see if you get the same thing I do. So that should end up being 193. Okay, 193. The key is that it's positive. Okay, so 193 is greater than 0. If it's greater than 0, anybody see how many solutions that means? 2 solutions. Very good. The only other case we didn't cover, which you would see in example C, is if you get 0, that's a 1 solution. Okay, so we can talk about why tomorrow. And I know you guys have questions, but we'll get to them tomorrow. But this should be a good start. Your homework will post after school. You're more than welcome to try to get ahead on it or save it for tomorrow. Thank you guys for staying with me, and we'll take more questions tomorrow.